everyone. Welcome to the Beauty in Between podcast, where we imagine a new way forward together. I'm Katie.
And I'm Gabe.
And today, we have a dear friend of mine, Tasha Jun, with us. Tasha, do you want to say hi to everyone?
Hello, everyone.
I'm so excited that you're here, Tasha. This episode has been in the making for like a year and a half, I think.
I think so.
Something like that. But to give anyone who does not yet know Tasha, or if you just haven't been following along with her journey as long, want to share a little bit about Tasha. She is a biracial Korean-American melancholy dreamer who grew up in a multicultural and biracial home. She has spent her life navigating liminal space. Her book, Tell Me the Dream Again, Reflections on Family and the Sacred Work of Belonging, is available now, and I have read it and written reviews on it. It's so good. Go find it wherever you get books. Go buy that book. Or hit me up and I'll let you borrow it. I will mail it to people. You can find her at TashaJun.com or sign up for her monthly-ish, and that was in her bio, monthly-ish notes at shalomsick.substack.com. And again, I am a follower, I am a friend and deep lover of Tasha, and highly support and recommend all of these things. So, Tasha, welcome. We're here.
Welcome in.
Thank you.
We're so excited to have you here. And before we jump into today's topic, we have just been enjoying asking guests and each other just sort of, what have you been enjoying recently? And especially, I know that summer is in full swing in y'all's neck of the woods. So I imagine there's a plenty of things. So what have you been enjoying recently?
So to give a little context, I'm in Indiana and it is summer and I've got 3 kids that are now out of school. High school, junior high, and elementary.
You
so
are
that's interesting.
living the life.
Yes, but in Indiana, we basically have like 2 little times of year that are nice, like weather-wise. And so that's the spring, which we're just coming to a close of, and the fall. Winter gets cold. It's not like brutal, but it gets cold and it's like unpredictable. And summer just gets super hot and humid. I know it's not as humid as where you guys are, but it's humid for me.
I didn't realize that Indiana was similarly like that you only get a couple of good points of weather. I thought Indiana was like, it's up north from here.
Right.
It's north Texas. I thought it was nice.
More weather.
Yes, you might say that. I think this is just coming from my husband and I. Both of us he grew up in California, where the weather's perfect, so, and I have some history there. And so I think that we might be a little biased, but
it's all relative.
Spring is really beautiful. Yes, the spring is really beautiful. And so what I've been enjoying, 2 things with my kids home and them being kind of on the older end now, like our elementary school girl, she's 10. So they are staying up late and they are sleeping in. And so the days just feel really nice. Yes, I was having to get up with her because they have all different school starts during the year. But sleeping in has been nice. Well, them sleeping in. So I get some like quiet time in the morning. And then it's starting to get hot and humid, but I've really been enjoying our backyard. It sounds really simple. But it's been like years of kind of getting it to a place where it's like nice to sit there and like just kind of, enjoy the space. And so it's been really regulating for me. And just really enjoy just sitting out there with some coffee and like trying to pretend like I'm a birder, which I'm not yet. But yes.
Sure you are.
I think it's in the cards. Yeah.
I can share with what I've been enjoying. Genuinely, I have been enjoying you sharing the different photos of your backyard. Really, the way that you show up on Instagram and just on socials and between your Substack and just what you share in the realm of intersectionality of identity, mixed identity, which we'll get into more in this podcast. You have been such an encouragement. So that's what I've been enjoying. You. On socials.
Thank you. It's such a weird place sometimes, especially right now. I feel like there's a lot going on. I mean, I feel there's a lot going on in the world. And so it's a lot, So yeah.
Yes.
So thank you for saying that.
I think I've been enjoying the weather too over here at Austin recently, because usually we get like a super summery weather and it gets up to the hundreds or like 105, 110.
That is true.
Yeah, like 112 is like, okay, we're maxing out.
Oh
So
my
it's been nice
gosh.
that honestly, it's been more in like the 80s in the morning and then
And
getting up
low
to yeah, like
90s.
low
Yeah.
90s. So
Okay.
it's been pretty stormy and pretty cloudy, which is kind of, it's reminiscent of like a winter fall weather, which is kind of
Yeah.
nice in a way.
Yeah.
Reminiscent.
Yeah.
Talking about the summer weather being reminiscent of like fall winter weather, which I so often associate with
Associate
my
with
more
introverts.
introverted friends.
Mm.
And on that note, that's what we're here to talk about today, and so many intersectionalities. And also for anyone who's just jumping into this episode, we have been exploring the different elements, different intersectionalities that make up our identity with our particular faith perspective, all sort of holding it all together. And I think mentioning that in this particular room of all of us having some mixed identity, different intersectionalities of what that looks like, that I'm excited to also get into. Um, our hope was just to sort of unflatten the box.
With it being the conversation specifically towards introverts, kind of how do you see yourself in that conversation? Because I don't know. I was even thinking about like, how long have you been an introvert for? How long have we? When was it
How did we
established?
arrive here?
Yeah.
It's a good question.
I think the first time I ever heard the introvert extrovert, labels was taking a Myers-Briggs test. Like, and that was like right out of college. I was working in full-time ministry at the time. And so our ministry team, I was living overseas in Germany. We
Mhm.
took a test. And at the time, I think I read the little descriptions before I went through the test to find out what I was. And I already had in the back of my mind at that time that I did not want to show up as an introvert. Like it just seemed like the lesser of two in that first
Mhm.
category. So I remember that, and I remember going through the test after that, and like almost wanting, like knowing what was true and not lying about it, but kind of like I don't remember what kind of test it was, like if it was a scale that you were, kind of filling in the dots with. But I remember almost just like trying to push to the edge of what was true, hoping that I would
Yeah.
come out as an extrovert. And I came out like kind of in between at that time. So that was like my first introduction. And it came with those, just that some understanding that it was worse to be an introvert, at that time
Hmm.
in my life, and that's changed a ton. That's changed so much for me over time. I think at the time how it was described was really simple and shallow. I don't even remember what was in the book that we were looking at, but I remember it just being kind of people taking away from it, like, oh, it's just that you're quiet.
Hmm.
It wasn't even like the motivations. It wasn't any of that, or like what energizes you. At least that's not the way we talked about it. So, um, anyway, it's moved along a lot from that, and I think it's something that I embrace that just helps me understand why I function the way that I function and what I need.
Mhm.
So yeah, I don't even remember what your first question was. I'm like, why am I talking about this? But yeah, that's
That was
where
great.
yeah.
Yeah, no, just getting to know a little bit about, well, for our audience too, like getting to know a little bit about where you come from. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's a really interesting point of feeling like you have this need to be on the extroverted side, but even kind of like feeling like you're pushing yourself to a
Yeah.
place of like, I want to convince people or like convince myself in a way. And yeah, I've like, it was something that I accepted very early on of like, okay, I definitely am an introvert,
Yeah.
and then over time, I've become, or I've kind of filled, I guess, more of that ambivert space.
Yeah.
And I think even too, like that verbiage is like, whenever people say it, they're like, I don't really know what that means then. Where it's like, you're saying ambivert, but you probably lean to one side or the other more like, it's like whenever somebody says they're ambidextrous and you're like, are you truly ambidextrous though? Can you really write with your left and your right? I think that's been something that I've like learned where I'm at with that too. And then I feel like I've kind of like shifted in where I've been, like partially
Mhm.
because of like social anxiety and things like that,
Yeah.
where I felt like, at one point I was like super talkative when I was a kid and then kind of dipped down and then,
Yeah.
I'm slowly coming back up and we'll see where it lands. But Bit
Okay,
more of a
so I have a question that came up from what both of you shared, and folks, we're already off script, which is great. Um, but also as the resident
I was
extroverted
gonna say as
leaning
the extrovert.
human, and the other another point, by the way, within this episode was that I wanted to be outnumbered. Tasha, you already touched on something that I was hoping to lean into with this conversation. You referred to there being sort of a value statement, whether that was society, cultural, yourself, your family, and all the different intersections. I would love to hear from both of you. It sounds like we're talking about a sort of journey of introversion,
Yeah.
of accepting your voice and where you've received value statements about showing up as an introvert, essentially being
Mm.
less valued. Because that's something I'm hearing across both of what you shared.
I mean, that was like my first experience of like hearing about introversion, extroversion. But it's also important the context because I was a part of a ministry that's very, very outgoing and very,
Hmm.
very, and it's probably shifted since then. It was a long time ago, but very much extroverted in nature. And I think, I feel like a lot of people probably have had this experience in ministry. Um, but that there's this importance placed on being able to interact, initiate with others in a specific way, and that it's tied to our ability to care for others, to love others, and
Mm.
it has to look a certain way. And so I think for me, it was very much tied to like it was worse to be an introvert, but also less spiritual, at the time, like in
Ooh.
the back of my head that if I was owning the fact that I was an introvert, I was going to be worse at, um, I mean, being spiritual, but my job, my job was this professional Christian at the time, so,
Hmm.
so there were layers, I think there, and I think that that carries into different, faith settings, the way that we think about what it means to live out the gospel or love others with our whole selves. I think for me what's changed over time is just realizing that I'm a contemplative person, which
Hmm.
is very tied to I think the way I experience faith but also my introversion. Like it's a very there's a lot of depth there, and I think leaning into that has brought a lot of freedom to the way I experience my faith, the way I live it out in relationship with others, so yeah, I think realizing that
Yeah.
not all groups are like the first one that I was a part of, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And that it wasn't a bad group, it's not a bad group, and yet there are, I guess, in every group there is some flawed, biased thinking about the way we should be and the way we should live out our faith. So yeah, just first response.
Yeah. No, I think something that gets associated with, I mean, just like general missions or ministry is like sowing broadly. And
Yeah.
so it's like if you have an introvert versus an extrovert, if you're putting them up against each other for whatever reason,
Oh,
Yeah.
then, like typically it's kind of seen as like, okay, the introvert, they'll have less of these interactions and they'll kind of get tired of it in a sense, and for
Yeah.
the extrovert it's like, oh well, that person can go and talk to 50 people and they can still be going, like you can be in
Right.
these large conversations and direct so many different things. And so in a sense it's like seen as being able to take many more opportunities. And then it's like, oh, they're not as scared of these different things, so
Right.
they can be bold and just go and be brash
mhm.
and unleash these things. And for the introvert, it's kind of seen as, oh, well, they you need a little break from things, and they might be a little more hesitant.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that like I love the idea of being contemplative. And it's like there are a lot of these times whenever I'm in the Bible study or in our groups, and I'm just sitting there thinking. And then Katie will turn to me and be like, what are you thinking about? And I'm like, okay, I've got like this whole thing to break down of this whole like process that I've gone through. But it's like I start developing a system or these like seeing these patterns in my mind, and everything just starts connecting.
Yeah.
And I think there is like definitely a beauty to that. But yeah, I mean, I've had a hard time accepting that um well, I guess like that identity of being an introvert myself, because it felt like it carried so many of those things along, which I think were like depression, anxiety were tagged along with it, and were kind
Yeah.
of like I felt like combined with that title of being an introvert for a long time. And
Yeah.
so kind of learning that freedom, like you're saying, of being who I am and not feeling bad for the certain things that I need or the
Yeah.
accommodations that I feel like I want, because for the same thing for an extrovert, like they have things that they want and need. And a
Yeah.
lot of people who are more extroverted, like they might have these great conversations, they're able to lead things, but then behind closed doors, like they suffer from a lot of similar things that that are present on both sides, just in different ways, or that might show up less publicly and more privately.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah.
Something else that's coming to mind. This is mainly just going to be me listening and then
Yeah,
asking follow-up
I'm making
questions,
you the host now,
which
basically.
is perfectly fine. The extrovert willing to host, get to host the introverts. Something else that's coming to mind when we were thinking about this episode, I was thinking about how in church spaces, the American church, we tend to favor extroverted leaning,
Mhm.
presenting humans, just
Yeah.
broadly speaking, for leadership, for speaking, kind of just across the board,
Mhm.
which I would say is a problem that
Yeah.
both of you feel free to speak into. And it also makes me think the American Western pace is also
Sure.
geared more towards faster paced, move quick, and then like just keep moving on without really pausing to take a breath. So I don't know. I don't actually have a question there exactly, but if I would love to hear y'all's thoughts about sort of the world here being built for faster pace, but existing as a slower paced human, and then where that
Yeah.
sort of overlaps with church as well. Sorry, that's not a
Yeah.
good question, but it is a
No,
thought.
I think like James Brown said, it's a man's world. It's not a woman's
Mm.
world. And I say it feels like an extrovert's world, not the introvert's world sometimes.
Hmm.
Because
Mm.
yeah, I mean, like you said, you kind of have that fast-paced moving system where it is usually seen as an advantage to be faster because you get
Yeah.
more stuff out, you're more efficient. Like it's like, oh, we just throw things at the wall and see what sticks.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I think there is like the community aspect. It helps because you have these different perspectives. When you have somebody that can come in, that can help with the like contemplative aspect of it. Of like, okay, I'm seeing everything that's going on. Let's help concentrate this and like figure out how to move forward together. Because if
Yeah.
you just have a bunch of things that are just going on, then like there's not really a clear direction a lot of times.
Yeah.
And so I think like with introverts, because a lot of times like they're more in that contemplative phase and are taking time to try to understand, and are moving a little bit slower. Sometimes like, people that are more extroverted or just more outward speaking, that they will fill in those gaps naturally. And
Yeah.
I don't think that's because they want to like remove space from somebody who is a little more introverted or an internal thinker, which I think that's a helpful distinction, is like that external versus internal processing is,
Hmm.
Yeah.
we're very different in that, which I really appreciate. Like whenever you turn to me and you're like, okay, what are you thinking? Or um, even like, you kind of mentioned, or we kind of mentioned, Tasha, of how there are certain accommodations that I kind of ask for. I'm like, hey, do you mind if I take a second to think about this?
Yeah.
Or like, yeah, I have to just say like, okay, well, give me a moment to kind of process that. I'm like, I just need a chill moment to kind of think about what's going on in my brain. Or hey, like I don't need a response right now, so I'm going to try to think about this, and then I'll let you know when I'm ready. And
Yeah.
those are kind of things that are hard to say because it's so uncommon.
Right.
And
Hmm.
I mean,
Hmm.
I think like whenever I do that, if I tell somebody that, they know that I'm intentionally thinking about it and I'm
Yeah.
trying to take time to understand. And so
Hmm.
usually people are like, oh, yeah, yeah, like go for it. Or I'm like, hey, I'm
Right.
going to bring out a journal, and I'm like writing stuff down there, like, okay, he's like actually thinking about it.
Yeah.
And it's like an appreciated thing, but we still don't naturally think about asking for that because you feel like you're slowing things down and you're stopping things or saying, hey, I need a second. And that's hard
Yeah.
to say a lot of times. In the same way that some people that are more internal processors will give space to others to just let them talk. There are times whenever I'm like, hey, do you want like a response, or do you just want me to listen? And
Uh-huh.
so I think it's
Mm.
a similar concept to that for like, hey, do you want to like have this conversation, or do you need time to process? And
Mm.
so making
Hmm.
space for that other person to go about it how they need to and
Yeah.
take that time. It's just being mindful of the other side, and it's just how you operate yourself, and what you're, I guess, keeping in mind in a sense.
That's really good. I love how you describe that. And I love how you kind of, I mean, you didn't say this outright, but I think kind of like what we're talking about or what you're hitting on is that it's kind of a dance, I think. And I think
Mhm.
that we all like need
Mm.
each other, introverts and extroverts, right? And the pacing part is just part of that dance, I think. So I mean, I think knowing that there's processing going on for both individuals or both people or both groups or whatever.
Yeah.
Like it's
Mm-hmm.
happening, and it works together and it flows together, but it just doesn't look the same all the time, you know. But I think it really, like, I love when someone asks me what I'm thinking, but even if I'm not ready to respond, so it's not like that's not a negative thing to be asked in the moment. But
Hmm.
yeah, to be
Right.
able to say, yes, I need some time. And I think too, when we say that, or when we acknowledge that there are different people in the room, whether it's like on a Zoom screen or a room we're talking to or a small group, um, I think that really gives other people permission and kind of leads the way. So you doing that, I think, gives other people, probably, whether you know they're an introvert or extrovert, some permission to be like, oh, it's okay to go at my own pace and think, which I think is really important and really valuable. I was thinking when you were talking about pacing, Katie, I was thinking about how this is like a whole nother layer. You're talking about pacing and just like what's
Mm-hmm.
valued in our culture. And I think being Asian American, this is really,
Yes, I wanted you to get into this.
okay, good. Well, I just thought about it when you brought that up, but I was thinking about how, on one hand, I feel like there's been a push because, and this is good, like just affirming that women can do anything, and that Asian American women aren't bound to the stereotype of being quiet. And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like that's great. And then I also feel like that has been really hard as a biracial or a mixed Asian American who is an introvert, because I think it's added this other layer. I think because of like a need for survival or to, push back against, things that have been oppressive. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there has also been this temptation to be a very flat type of Asian American in response to that. Does that even make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, like all of a sudden, like there's this pressure as an Asian American that I have to be even louder or move even faster. Otherwise, I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to be like not just put into a hole as an Asian American, but also just as a woman, all these things. And so that has been really hard more recently because I think as I've over the last 10 years, probably 5, 10 years, as I felt like I can own that I move at a sloth's pace. Like I love my like snail movement. I think it's good, not better than others, but just that's me. And I need that,
Mm-hmm.
I can own that. I can say that out loud, ask for things now. But there is this fear sometimes of being lumped back into that stereotype and this feeling that I need to, and some pressure even from other Asian Americans, like to not be
Mm-hmm.
the quiet Asian American woman. And I'm like, but that's kind of who I am. Not the stereotype,
Mm-hmm.
but
Right.
yeah. So anyway, I don't know if that makes sense, but there are a lot of layers there, and it gets
Well,
really, really messy.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense. And I'm
Yeah.
so glad that you went there because I really was hoping that you would go there, but I couldn't think of a good question. So we've done it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and something within that, in my mind, what you shared, and, we can cut this if it makes no sense. But with what you shared and what I'm thinking about, like the stereotype of the silent Asian American woman
Mm,
when it comes
yeah.
to the question of voice is
Yeah.
that we don't we don't have one. We don't get to
Right.
have
Right.
Hmm.
a
Right.
voice. Whereas like the differential, whereas obviously I too am a mixed Asian American, Southeast Asian, woman who does not fit. I don't come close to to the stereotype of quiet or silent Asian American woman, which has had its own bumps in
Yeah.
my experience, and that's not what we're talking about today. And relative to your experience as well, that I think I would hazard a guess that for both of us in our journeys with introverted and extroverted leaning versions of it, not even needing to be given permission,
Mm,
but just figuring out, giving permission to ourselves
yeah.
to show up authentically in how our voices are wired and like showing up in the voice that God has gifted you, Tasha, and you, Gabe, and you, listeners, and me. And that introverted and extroverted in and of itself, one is not better than the other. Occasionally, one can be physically louder. And then, like the quiet, still voice, God's voice is quiet and still and is introverted coded.
Mm.
It's not often extroverted coded. Again, I have no questions here. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, I guess, about your experiences, but I think that is a good thing to, or a helpful thing to call out is that kind of how, like, the world is not seen to be the place where internal thinkers have as many opportunities to speak up.
Hmm.
And so the expectation of a woman to kind of be that person who doesn't have as much of a voice and as much of a say is definitely important to call out because it is an unhelpful thing. There will be a woman will speak up, and some people might see that as, oh man, like she's really aggressive, or like it's kind of unusual, and it's kind
Yeah.
of like takes people aback,
Aggressive.
and they're like,
Ugh.
whoa, I don't know what to do with this. I've never experienced this before,
Hmm.
and it's just
Yep.
man, a hard and silly thing in society.
Yep.
But I did want to ask you, like, as well, with your experience of being
Oh,
more
me.
of, yeah, an Asian American woman that is a bit more like bold, I would say, and brave, and more like the lioness, as you would like to hear. How do you feel like there are any sort of exceptions or things that you have to ask for in conversation whenever you feel like, hey, I actually need this in order to communicate better or to process better? I would ask that you do this, like taking a little more time or um, talking about things in a different way.
That's a really interesting question.
Or even like if
Um,
they're like, for me, like phrasing my questions and things that I'm saying in a different way than I'm used to.
yeah. And my answer to this, where my mind was going, was first the sort of shadow side answer of like my experience as, especially in white evangelical spaces, but even just generally Christian spaces. The shadow side answer is that I have felt the, I don't want to say need, but I have felt like it has been communicated to me that I should like make myself smaller
Hmm.
and like make myself smaller and more, and by doing more palatable to the room around me. More palatable, not necessarily because I'm being aggressive if I'm loud or speak quickly, and I'm being like more holy if I speak quieter and slower. And also, what comes to mind, I actually have had a lot of conversations with um, my family up in New York who used to be Women of Wonder and now they're Wonder Aloud. I engaged in this question with them a
Hmm.
lot, actually. So shout out to Wonder Aloud. I'm going to link them in the show notes as well. Wonderful community. Asian American women led and highly contemplative space, which is where, like, I, as extrovert, so this is kind of my answer, I have taken on and really found a lot of life and liberty and freedom in engaging, practicing, learning more about contemplative spaces and practices of embracing slowness,
Hmm.
Yeah.
stillness, and silence, and where I, as an extrovert, can
Yeah.
like link into those things. That yes,
Sure.
I move faster. So thinking about your question, if I'm asking something of the room, I I feel like the one ask I can think of is that I sort of am like, stay with me. I promise I'm going somewhere, which is essentially the like experiment of having a podcast. Every time I speak, I promise I'm going somewhere.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I know that there are sometimes whenever I am like internally processing and I'm like, oh, I'm so ready to say the thing. And I'm like, I don't want to forget it. And so I'm like, I'm ready to say it. But I'm also like, but I want to pay attention to everything that you're saying. And so I'm like trying so hard to hold the two different things.
Yes.
But you're like, stay with me. And I'm like, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. I'm locked in. I'm trying.
Lock in. We're going somewhere, I promise.
And I was gonna say, I think you might identify with, and let me know if this doesn't feel like true to you.
Hmm.
But I think something that you have called out in your own experiences, like within our conversations or how we felt at home, like whenever you're talking about
Uh-oh.
things, is as a woman just out in the world, and like something that I sometimes feel as an introvert is like you might not have as many opportunities to speak because your voice isn't as valued in the room at times or given as much space. And so, because of that, like you said, you feel like you have to be palatable. And whenever you do get the opportunities to say something, you feel like it has to be this nicely constructed thing. And it's hard because if you feel like you said something wrong or you said something that might get misinterpreted, then you feel like you have to backtrack. But oh, I don't have space to do that. And then you feel like, darn, like I've messed up the opportunity that I've had this conversation in a sense. And it just feels messed up because you don't have a place to be who you are. And so you feel like you have to conform yourself or to show them in such a small and succinct sentence.
Good Lord. Yeah, that feels true to me.
Okay.
You're going to make me cry on the podcast. Yeah, I think to sort of somewhat put a bow on this, because I want to reflect this question to both of you. In those spaces, and again, to the point of like, what am I asking of the room? What am I considering when I speak or am asked to speak and showing up in a room? Is that this can be like shadow side and healthy, depending on the context, essentially, is that I am almost constantly considering like the temperature of the room to the degree of how much space am I taking up? Because ever since I was little, and some of this is within the like mixed Southeast Asian part of me, some of this is in that my biological parents got divorced when I was 4, and I'm the big sister, so I stepped into a protector role in the Asian side of the household. Like there's a lot of things that led me here. But I have always known that I don't have trouble stepping into spaces where maybe some folks are more timid or scared or fearful of stepping into or something. Like I'll fill the gap if it must be filled, which for me has often like one of my best friends who watches this podcast. So shout out to her, but I'm not going to name you. When we were in 6th grade, I remember she would describe herself as being deathly introverted. I literally turned around in class one day and I was just like, I know that you have a lot of thoughts going on in your mind because whenever you share, it shows that you've been highly observant of what's been going on in the room and you have taken time to consider it. And I remember turning around and being like, we're going to be friends. And I think I may have said, we're going to be best friends. You don't know it yet, but I'm just letting you know so that my extroverted energy doesn't frighten you away. And I've done that many, many times throughout my life. And what all of that is just that I'm constantly considering, am I taking up too much space in a room, especially if the room is more introverted leaning, or the more shadow side being if it's more capitalist, efficient, like short, quick answers leaning, am I showing up as the right type of woman? Especially in Christian spaces, because my voice as being what can be referred to as unpolished and yet in other conversations is described as authentic and open and honest and inviting and warm, right? Like those are positive things. And at the same time, I've also received aggressive, unpolished, etc., etc. That running the question of like, am I taking up too much space can be harmful to me if I'm trying to like contort myself into a particular position. And at the same time, I think has also served me, and this is like a call to those who maybe are more extroverted leaning, that I also tend to think, who hasn't spoken in a while? And at this point, I just constantly assume that if someone hasn't spoken, it's not because they don't have thoughts. It's probably because for one reason or another, be it sociological, cultural, psychological, their general personality, introverted, extroverted, all of the above, whatever it is, that they probably don't know how to jump into this stream of the conversation. Right. But if the other question is who's not entered into this space yet, it helps me to look around and be like, okay, who can I ask? Who hasn't spoken? So that's sort of my closing thought there, to sort of mirror that question back to y'all and maybe with a little more of a point on it. I'd be interested to hear what each of you, as introverts living in, I think it's fair to say, an extroverted world, what would you ask for, and what would you speak to the extroverted world and leaders and leaning people?
I think for myself, and I say this to just people in my normal life, is just being conscious of those around you. And like you said, kind of the voices that are in the room. Because I think it gets harder and harder sometimes too, like the bigger and larger the group is. And so even being able to make those like accommodations in a sense too, of like, not everybody wants to be in a large group of like 10 to 20 people. Yeah. And for me, like I function much better on a smaller group basis whenever I have these one-on-one or one-on-two conversations. And so making space or being flexible in those things, but also kind of offering different options. Because being able to offer those options sometimes of like, hey, I know like you didn't want to come to this party, do you want to like go get coffee with just me? Like those kind of things where you kind of offer those options and are mindful of different people's needs and desires and wants and valuing the different things that an introverted or a more internal processor will provide. Um, and being able to encourage others that it is valuable and that
Mhm.
if we lose that voice, we're losing a lot of value. But also the fact that, like, even with me or with you, Tasha, and with you, Katie, like we have these experiences where we feel that the space is kind of closing in and that
Yeah.
everybody has those in a way, being able to identify what that looks like for yourself and knowing that other people are going through those similar things, but in a very different way sometimes.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that was great. And I think it just kind of to follow that thread of space, I think sometimes I'm thinking in my head in different space, like give us some space, whether that's space to think, or just some extra quiet time. What it can look a lot of different ways. So so that, um, and I think also to circle all the way back to that, that first impression I had of it just being quiet and it being like this flat quiet. I think something I read
Mhm.
recently, I think it was Adam Grant, he said, we're pro quiet, which takes it to a whole nother level. A lot of introverts, it's not just um, being quiet or shy. Because sometimes I don't feel afraid. I don't feel timid or shy or anything.
Right.
I just need that space, like to think a little bit
Mhm.
and to process internally. But the pro quiet, like that really stood out to me. Because I think I do need that. I need some quiet space to process too. So it's like yeah, different need there. But it kind of takes it to a lot more nuanced and layered definition of what quiet can mean, So so I would say that too. I was saying being pro quiet is okay. So
But I
yeah.
think even for the people that are introverted or these internal processors, like don't feel bad for taking that space or
Yeah.
asking for space because like we've mentioned, like I think society is moving super fast right now. And all the things that we have encourage us to go that way of like having these dopamine surges or needing to get things done efficiently. Like internally, we all know that that's not the one way to go.
Hmm.
But being able to express that, not feel bad, and feeling that freedom to be who you are and not seeing the world and saying that's all it's going to be,
Yeah.
but knowing that those things can change and that within your home, within your family, you can create those spaces. So being able to kind of create that world for yourself and asking other people to help create that for you, and being able to co-create together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
And I think, hold on. What? I am editing that out.
Do you need a second?
Yeah, I need a second.
We need
That's funny.
space.
Um, maybe I'm gonna keep this in. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Um,
Everybody needs a space.
and by we I mean really like you, Tasha and Gabe are sort of tiptoeing into the space already where the invitation that I'm thinking of, this is specifically for those who are more prone to faster paced external processing, extroverted ways of being, which are great. And so are the inversion of those. Part one of the invitation is practicing. Like, look around the room and think and maybe take notice of whose voice haven't we heard in a little while, and can you use your giftings, the way that you're wired, to sort of take up space and then give that space to someone else. And the part two of that invitation is that I'm also imagining extroverts being like, okay, I'm going to go ask an introverted person what they need.
Survey says.
Right. And then I imagine that introverted person, if they come up in the scenario of like, yeah, I just need more think time or I just need more space. And then my sort of secondary invitation to the extroverted leaning among us is that not if, but when you receive that as a blessed response, because that means that that human trusts you and that you
Yeah.
have created a space for them to be honest, which is beautiful.
Mm.
That when they respond with, I need more time, which is essentially, I need to move slower than maybe your normal mode of operandum, to embrace that maybe uncomfortable feeling, or for some of us, even the
Yeah.
desire to like move the boat along and sort of fill the space and then circle back. Like, my invitation would be to create the space to just embrace the silence, like a warm hug. And then just let that space breathe, depending on the context, if it's just one-on-one or if there's a group or whatever it might be. Embrace silence and see what happens if you let them take the reins in guiding the pace. Tasha, what about you?
That's really beautiful. Yeah, I was specifically thinking about kind of the times that we're in, specifically right now, how much, how often I want to go check the news, even though I'm a slow processor because I just want to know what's going on and how much
Mm-hmm.
I'm taking in, like how much I constantly feel like, oh, there's something to do justice oriented, which I feel very
Mhm.
passionately about. And in my conversation with my husband, who is even more introverted than I am, which is so interesting because I think what you're
Hmm.
saying just makes me think of this, that we need to give each other space, even with all of these things, like to not have to catch up or to be at the same place with everything. And that can be hard in our performative culture, you
Yeah.
know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I guess the invitation is to honor not just the pace that we're all at, but the people that are in your actual lives right now, to honor their pace, but also just the dance that you're in with them. Like, because we have different paces and we have different ways of taking things in, and to not dishonor it by um, putting that should pressure, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
where we should be at with whatever, like our intake, our
Yes.
consumption, our whatever, but to honor the people before anything else. So
Well, man, I think just hearing what our discussions have looked like with different guests and stuff on our episodes for this season, there's always been this conversation like with all these pieces of what we look at for what kind of makes up our identity, that all of these things are a process and a journey. We're constantly learning, and asking questions are going to be the most helpful thing to help us learn. And I think even like those times whenever you do allow spaces, like being able to ask people, hey, was that helpful? And you're kind of able to get the feedback and you're like, okay, good. Like we're moving forward. And yeah, so this is all a process, all a journey. So give yourself space and time as well.
Give
Not just other people.
yourself.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not just
yes,
other people.
that's good.
And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so I would just encourage people to do that. But we so appreciate you being on this episode with us, Tasha. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, it was an excellent conversation. It was so great to meet you.
Yeah, and you know what's crazy, Tasha, is that on the way here, Gabe was literally like falling asleep in the
Yeah, it
car,
was.
physically tired, and it's so interesting that he like lit up in this conversation on introversion.
I literally saw a car at one point. I was like, is that car driving or is it parked?
Oh, good gracious. And he was
You need to go
driving,
take a
so it's
nap
also
now.
I'm really glad that we got here.
Go find
But
space for a
yes,
nap.
Yes, this was my
exactly.
coffee. You know,
Yeah.
sometimes people do energize you.
Yes,
Sometimes the
That's
it's
conversations
true.
do energize you.
it's
It's
again,
true.
we're gonna keep that in.
Yep.
And also before we say a final goodbye, Tasha, is there anything that you'd like to add, share, promote if folks want to follow you, which they should? Where should they do that?
I don't think so. I feel like you already said all the
Say
things.
it again.
So
You can say it again.
I mean, my Shalom 6 Substack, that's monthly-ish, sometimes even less than that. Uh, that's a good place. I'm on Instagram, probably more than anything else. That's Tasha Jun B. Yeah, and that's probably it. I'm probably gonna take a break this summer at some point too, just so I can give
Yes.
myself some space.
That's good.
You should
Yeah,
take the
yeah.
space. So yay. And to everybody listening, watching, thank you for hopping into this conversation. And go follow Tasha. She's amazing. I love her. You should love her too. That's my extroverted energy. Okay, bye.
Bye. Thank y'all.
You guys are awesome.
The Beauty in Between podcast is part of the Chasing Justice podcast network. To find out more, go to chasingjustice.com. The best ways to support us and the podcast directly are by leaving us a review, sharing this podcast, and joining the Chasing Justice Patreon linked in our show notes.